We're all suffering.
And
how do we get on with it?
right.
How do you not make your suffering more important than mine? I had this thought the other day.
Phails at philosophy.
I have this belief that I had a hard childhood. I had it when I was having my walk with Peppermint this morning, and I thought, why do I feel shame or guilt whenever I try to express it? And I thought, well, it's because it's easy for me to point to other people who had it worse.
Right.
And I think that's that idea that, man, we've all got this suffering. So why am I holding up my own suffering as some badge of, this is why I've got it hard. This is why you should give me a break, because I had this tremendous suffering in my past.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the problem is we think about justice in terms of moral accountability instead of doing good.
We think of justice. Say more about that.
So recently in my ethics class, we were doing an essay by Iris Marion Young, and it caused me to kind of go back and reread her work. She's a late 20th century social and political philosopher.
Okay.
And she wrote, I think it's called Justice and the Politics of Difference is her main text. But what her argument ultimately, and she's thinking about social justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is we live in a world where injustice happens, right? And let's just start there. And injustice happens in such a way that we look at our system and there are people who suffer from the system. And we look at what produces that suffering, and it's the system itself. There's not a single actor we can blame. And she uses, when she builds her argument, she uses an example of like a single mom. I can't remember if I can get into this, all the details right, but a single mom who's trying to like get a job to raise her kids, and she can't get the job she needs to have time to also, like, she has to work 2 jobs.
Yeah.
And she has a huge commute, but she can't afford a car.
Yeah.
And it just keeps collapsing around her, even though she's doing everything she needs to do to be able to take care of herself and her kids. She just keeps failing. And there's nothing that's producing that failure except for a system of things that produce that for her. And yeah, at any point we can say, yeah, her boss is not paying her enough, but he's also in a system of having to account for, his taxes and everything, that's what he can afford, right? So faced with that unjust system, she says the fundamental problem that prevents us from addressing the injustice is that we're focused on a notion of justice that's rooted in blame, right? It's rooted in the notion that I owe you, I owe my society, I owe the world my moral good because I need to make up for a failing, right? Like I need to pay you more because I am wrong and I should be blamed for paying you less.
My
right?
shame or my guilt.
It's this shame-guilt notion of justice, right? And ultimately her argument is to abandon that and instead embrace what she calls political responsibility, and then does an analysis of how you think about what is your responsibility to do good. It's much more rooted in how you benefit from what's going on, your power to affect the world, your own subjugation to it, right? And how involved you are. So, and it ends up being a much more rich way of thinking about justice, because instead of saying, oh, it's this huge unjust system I need to fix, confronting the complicated aspect of it, trying to find someone to blame, ultimately that I think leads to things like, oh, it's the libs who are making this terrible. It's it's this group, it's that group, it's the bankers. And it's not that we don't have to see where there are bad actors, but that most of the bad action is a product of the system. So let's focus on the system. Who are you? Right?
Well,
the question is
there an idea that we all are supposed to have a certain thing?
Yeah, her notion is that
we're all supposed to have wealth. I mean, has that ever existed in the world? Is that when we come up with justice,
right?
What does that even mean? That means
usually
that we all share
Yeah, it's
fairly
right.
resources.
The resources are distributed through some notion of fairness. And instead of thinking in terms of that, thinking, how can I create justice as a good in the world? What can I do from my position, my power, my resources?
This is like how you're using your agency and your locus of control.
Right. And really focusing on your moral agency as an agent in the political system from wherever you are. What is it you can do? I think that's, and I think that's not exactly what the Buddhists are talking about, because they're focused on enlightenment, but they are also focusing on, so you are a knot of experience that seems to have something like agency, even though there's no self that transcends that.
I mean, we should get there next.
Right.
It's like, how can you have karma when there's no self?
Right. You're a knot of experience that can either be, going back to that quote, be like, oh, look at all this injustice, look at this, and get angry about it and get upset about it, or you can operate from loving kindness, right? You can say, all right, what is the good I can produce right now for the people around me?
Yeah.
And for myself, right? And ultimately with that good being enlightenment. And that's kind of the split, you might see between kind of a classic Buddhist, I'm working for my own enlightenment, to a Mahayana Buddhist, I'm working for the enlightenment of the world.
All. Yeah.
But either system works for her to get you out of that, like, who's to blame? And is there some large power I can blame for this injustice? Is there some story I can tell myself to make me feel better about it? Or can I just sit with the reality that you're in a broken world with broken systems, and you're going to try to produce the most good you can? And in this case, the good being helping yourself and others get enlightened.
Yeah. We live in a chaotic world, a broken world, where things don't always make sense.
Right. And some of that's human and some of that's not.
Some of it's...
That's why the river is such a good, because initially it begins with human evil.
Well, because those people poisoned the river in a past life or something.
Right. But I mean, initially, like, sometimes we can be like, oh, well, there's bad people, we just need to fix the people. But then, you can do a whole lot of good, and a hurricane comes and wipes you out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or earthquake.
In movies, there's always this protagonist and antagonist, and sometimes which one's the good guy? Protagonist?
The protagonist
is good. The antagonist, oh yeah, I think it's anti. Is tagonist mean guy? Protagonist, I think good guy. Antagonist, anti-guy.
No,
it'd be a lot cooler if that's
the notion that comes from, if I remember correctly, Aristotle's Rhetoric or Poetics, where he's looking at Greek tragedy. Agon means suffering.
Okay.
So
he's the suffering guy who's suffering.
The main character.
Right. But part of that is like man versus nature.
Right.
And so it's like, if you get man versus man under control, well, nature doesn't really care about man versus man struggles.
Right.
It's just going to come and do its will. But I mean, you could put man under the category of nature. We're all part of nature. I mean, that gets into this whole chaotic mess.
Yeah.